Hello and welcome everyone to the ninth official episode of A Better Magic podcast, brought to you by Team Better Magic here in the heart of beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana. This is your host Jared, and today I am joined with our buddy, Mr. Justin Chow. How's it going, Justin?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing very well.
Awesome. Yeah, so Jeremy's out for the night, and Nick and some of the other guys are doing some other stuff. So Justin was kind enough to come on the show to hang out with us today. Justin's a bit of an expert as far as playing like control and fun decks in Standard, and he's also one of the guys that I like to talk a lot to about Magic Finance. So we're going to have a lot of really fun stuff to talk about today with all these new cards coming out. And I'm pretty stoked for Dragons of Tarkir. What are your initial thoughts, man?
Well, they say Dragons is a lot about casual players and the like, and as a casual player or as an EDH player, I'm the kind of person at the table who plays stacks. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm that guy.
Yeah, dude. Just total card advantage. Just being rude to your opponent. You don't let them play a thing and just kill them with math. Yeah, you don't even play any creatures.
Yeah, there are some cards out there that just don't let you play creatures.
Yeah, I mean the deck's good, man. And again, if you like those more controlling decks that really take advantage of some of the more fun mechanics of Magic and not just all this creature combat stuff, that's one way to win for sure.
That is true. I might address that too later about tuck rules that just changed. It just came on my head.
Yeah, no, let's for sure talk about that. Another thing, yeah, I know you're a big EDH fan and a big EDH player too, so I want to make sure, since the rest of us who are on this cast don't talk about it very much at all, it is actually pretty important to the community. So let's make sure we squeeze some of that in here too. But so today, what are we going to talk about? So we both went to a pre-release. I actually went to two pre-releases for Dragons of Tarkir. So I want to make sure that we talk about kind of our experiences, kind of the experiential design of getting, the same little box of booster packs and a seeded pack that we've gotten for the last almost 2.5 years now. It's kind of the kitschy thing that they've decided they're going to keep doing with all of these pre-releases. So we'll talk through some of that and talk about who won and the decks we played. And then we even got to draft a wonky kind of triple Dragons of Tarkir draft, and that was super fun. And it was a good way to see kind of the redundancy of cards that are good and how they really take over the format. So I want to make sure we touch on that. Knowing, of course, that the actual format will be, when you open up your booster packs, it'll be 2 packs of Dragons of Tarkir and a Fate Reforged pack. But like I said, we got to have a little fun with that wonky draft, so we'll talk about that. And the actual pre-release for Dragons of Tarkir on Magic the Gathering Online is in a little bit, so it's actually coming up next week, so I want to talk about what the listeners can do as far as taking advantage of that. Some Judge promos came out. I don't know if you've seen them yet or some of the new artwork, but they're pretty beautiful, man.
I've seen it, and Ravages of War, I didn't know that was a thing until you told me, like,
oh, yeah,
the history behind it, how they wanted to expand these cards into like places like China, and they basically did a functional reprint of cards that already existed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you jump back to EDH, like you could technically have 2 Armageddons in your deck. One's just going to cost $5 and the other's going to cost like 200.
Uh-huh. Yep, and I mean, again, that's one of the reasons they come out as Judge promos, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the financial implications of that, especially you as an EDH player. I want to get some of your thoughts on that. I know you recently had an interesting experience sending some high dollar cards out in the mail, so we want to make sure we can talk about how to help the listeners kind of save their money as far as shipping goes, what the best options are. I know you've done a little bit of research, so I want to pick your brain on that. And then we'll move into kind of the standard part of the show, talk about what happened in Richmond over the weekend. There was a bunch of really cool standard decks being played, implementing the new Dragons of Tarkir cards. So I want to touch briefly on that. And, of course, the Pro Tour is coming up in 2 weeks. So if there's any interesting tidbits we want to talk about, kind of what we think is going to make a showing there, let's absolutely jump into that. All right, so let's talk about what the heck was going on at the Dragons of Tarkir pre-release. So you and I think for the last 4, 5, 6 pre-releases, have showed up to our local shop. Had a ton of fun. I've been a big fan of pretty much all the sets that have come out in the last couple years. Um, and Dragons of Tarkir was no disappointment. I thought it was a ton of fun. At our local shop, we had maybe 30. No, we had like 50 people, something like that.
Yeah, you went to the one on the first day, which was 50 people. We capped it off actually at 24, and
Okay.
people were all trying to get in the door, but we told them like an hour ahead, it's full. Sorry.
Wow. So I mean,
Yeah.
so it's a super popular set, right? I mean, like hands down, first things first. That this set is super popular. I mean, there are people coming out of the woodworks for these pre-releases. They do usually. You'll usually have a handful of people that come that like the only interaction they have with Magic in the first place is coming to a pre-release once every 3 months, right? There are just those people in the community, but I think more than any other set, Dragons of Tarkir really has brought people out, to experience playing with these cards. Mostly because there's dragons, right? I mean, dragon is in the name. People love dragons. They love the flavor. They love the idea, and a lot of these dragons are playable. I
And
mean,
what do
they're
you know?
yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons. So you get all that kind of people who would come out for Dragons just
Mhm.
because it's Dragons. So you can't really complain about that. I mean, you see all kinds of people that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, and for people like you and I who maybe want to do some trading, maybe want to see people's binders who only show up to a game shop once or twice a year, but who have Magic cards that are nice to look at and things that you'd like to get your hands on. It's awesome that again Wizards has created essentially like they know their market so well that they've essentially designed a set to play to the fanboys, right? To play to the fantasy geeks and Dragons of Tarkir does not disappoint on that front. So no, it was an awesome pre-release. So in Dragons of Tarkir, essentially the timeline has changed. So now the dragons have taken over Tarkir and they rule over all the other humanoids, and the humanoids essentially do their bidding. And instead of having three-colored wedge clans like we had in Khans of Tarkir in the new timeline, we have two-color dragon broods. And so at the pre-release, you're able to choose your allied color dragon brood, and you got a little box like they've done for the past 2.5, 3 years or so. And it had, correct me if I'm wrong here, so it had one pack of Fate Reforged, right?
That's right. Just one pack of Favorite Forge,
Okay.
4 packs of dragons, and then 1 pack of seeded dragons,
Yep.
which would be based on the clan that you picked.
Got it.
And
And so, yeah, so the developers essentially made these seeded packs that are randomized, but only contain cards in the color combination that you choose, right?
yeah, and I don't know about your experience, but in mine, the seeded pack had basically all white and blue cards because I went with Ojutai. Now, I
Mhm.
in previous pre-releases, so for example, Fate Reforged, they were nice enough to include like a gain land and an artifact that produced all the manas in your color, and even the tri-land that produced manas in your color.
Yeah.
But in this case, I mean, it's more of a, you're expected to build a deck that's 2 colors, basically, more like a 70-30 mix or something to that nature.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I got all blue and white, and they weren't necessarily blue and white cards that I'd like to play. So it really, I guess it really varied by your luck.
Yeah, again, that's another part of just playing sealed in general, right? And I know they want to keep a lot of that feeling. So,
Yeah.
so the seeded pack isn't necessarily guaranteed. I mean, it's interesting, that we say this now because if you go on in the next set to play Origins and you expect, and that going in, it's actually going to be randomized. But I had I did the same thing. I chose the blue-white clan after looking over all the limited cards and kind of getting a feel for how the set is constructed. I figured blue-white flyers with some playing some tempo-oriented spells was really the way to go. And I was lucky enough to open up in that seeded pack. You were guaranteed one rare, that was representative of one of the colors that you were playing, particularly one that symbolized like the clan that you had chosen. And that card came, stamped with a big gold stamp on it, and it was in foil. And I actually got the Dragon Lord Ojutai, so the dragon leader of the two-color clan that I chose. And every time I played him, the dragon did its job. A big 5/4 flyer for 5 mana. It was extremely efficient. It has hexproof as long as you're not attacking with him. And when you do attack with him, right, if it connects with the opponent, you get to draw 3 cards off the top of your deck, choose one, and then put 2 back on the bottom of your deck in any order. So you really get to like to optimize your draws, and it was extremely powerful. I was really happy with that. My entire pool was actually I consider to be quite good, but unfortunately I only went two. I went 2, 2, and 2 on the day. So something I took away from that experience is, and I played as well as I could. I played as fast as I could. And in sealed, if you're playing blue and white, like expect to draw a bunch of those games because the deck was extremely good at playing the tempo defensive game. But the removal is so good in this set, like so good in this format, that even when I started putting up evasive threats, they would just get removed. Like I was very good at not dying. Like 'cause I was extremely good at getting rid of their threats. But no matter what other color combination I was playing against, they also had extremely good answers for when I finally stuck a threat. Did you have a similar experience?
Pretty much. I mean, I actually went 1, 2, and 2.
Yeah.
Which is to say that I drew 2 rounds, just like you did.
Yeah. So I mean, the exact same experience. Yeah. And
Yeah, and I actually did not go blue and white. I played blue and white in my first game of the first round,
okay.
and immediately after that, I took out all my white cards and I put in all my green cards, and that's how I played for the rest of the day, basically blue and green.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the rationale behind that is because, you know, how it's sealed, and so the quality of your cards can range anywhere from pretty good to pretty terrible. And I thought that my white pool was pretty below average, and after the first game I realized it just wasn't worth trying to play it.
Okay.
And so I went with blue-green for the rest of the day. And I actually went up against some interesting opponents. There were some opponents who were playing basically all the dragons in their pool, and it was spread out across 3 different colors.
Really? But there's not even any really good fixing in this limit.
I know, and that's why when I saw that, and I saw them having 3 different basic lands on turn 3, I was just...
Well, it's just luck, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you know how you feel like, well, I guess I'm being punished for, you know...
For playing by the rules?
Right,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, you gotta hate that, man. That just... the one thing to consider, you know, for our listeners, if you're building a sealed pool in a format that is very clearly designed to be a 2-color ally-colored format, right? Like it is designed to be played that way. And if you try to beat the probability, yeah, so maybe 1 out of what, like 100 games, I don't know the math, I'm just making this up, but 1 out of however many games, yeah, you'll get lucky and you'll hit the 3 basic lands you need in a row, and that'll feel really good. Okay, and you might do that maybe the first game. You might even do it the second game. But once your luck runs out, you only have yourself to blame for essentially building your deck wrong at that point, right? And what bugs me is when people make those decisions, like the deck you were just talking about, and they go on a little bit of a run, and then they can do nothing but complain once it doesn't pay out for them in the later rounds when they're playing against much more tuned and streamlined decks against players who are much more skilled. Again, the only thing I can say is you know, that's your fault for not understanding the format and how you're supposed to build your deck. And don't get me wrong, there are some rare circumstances where it is correct to build against the grain. It is correct to build against what the developers have essentially put in front of you. But I mean, the percentage of the time where that is actually the case is so low that that your situation, you know, would have to be pretty extreme for that to be the correct decision. So
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with that. And I've done that before too. And
yeah.
It was like a sealed PPTQ that I just built 4 colors, and the probabilities were a little bit off. But I did reasonably well. I kind of, well, I almost made the top 8 too, but it just it didn't work out at the end because, you know, laws of probability and stuff,
Right.
stuff like that. But you know, I did draw the first one, I think, and you know, I was always towards the bottom end of the tables, and so I ended up seeing decks like these, which is not to say they weren't good, but I guess they weren't exactly consistent.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And it depends on who you are as a Magic player. To like the really, really good Magic players, like the pros, can get away with kind of hedging their bets on those super inconsistent but very high power level decks, because a lot of the time they can play around what their opponent's doing until they get to the point in the game where they've just drawn all the stuff they need. But you have to be, I mean, your skill level as a player has to be so incredibly high to make that work. And if you're not there, don't waste your time just trying to squeeze all of your bombs or all of your, high impact cards into a deck that has an incredibly inconsistent mana base, because you're just going to end up disappointing yourself more often than not, right? And when I say that, I essentially say that because I don't need anyone to come crying to me. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm telling you this up front, just play Magic the way it's supposed to be played. When you win enough, right, and you've gained the skill to then make those higher level decisions, go for it. But until then, learn the basics, play the way you're supposed to play, and you'll have a much more enjoyable pre-release experience, for example.
Yeah, and I think especially for this set, that's how it was built. Because as I looked over, just before we opened the pool spot, just looking over the cards within the set, with the spoilers and everything, the one thing that kept coming across my head was, this looks incredibly balanced.
Yeah. Oh, this
Really,
set's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, it really didn't matter which clan you went with. The
Yeah.
power level in every clan was pretty balanced. I mean, the mechanics would be very different to be sure, but still,
Yeah.
everything else being equal, you had an equal chance going with any clan. And I think on your day, it was not just Guy, the Ojutai clan that took the first place. But on mine, it was something like Silumgar maybe, or maybe Red Green.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, the guy who won on my day, I think, got through a couple lucky rounds because I built my deck next to him, and his pool seemed a lot weaker. Like, it seemed consistent, it seemed fine. It just seemed a lot weaker on power level than mine or even the guy across from me. And at the end of the day, to hear that he had won, and I essentially forced, my deck essentially forced me into two draws was it was weird. Like, just knowing that made me think that, again, all the power is very balanced, almost too balanced in that case, right? Because if, like, you can't kill your opponent, they can't kill you, and you're drawing in two games just because that's how your deck's built and how the power level of the cards play out. It's interesting, but I had the exact same thought. I mean, looking through all the cards, you can tell the set. I might be wrong, but I believe the set was actually designed by Matt Gottlieb, who is actually a former developer who also sometimes leads design. So you know that he was the kind of guy going into it totally math-minded, where some of these other sets are done by just the straight-up designers who are just there to make fun cards that people want to play with, and sometimes competitive, sometimes not. Whereas a guy like Mark Gottlieb knows exactly what needs to be in a set to make it as balanced, the numbers as balanced as possible for the game, and that is really played out in Dragons of Tarkir, which is cool. Like,
yeah,
I like that a lot.
and talking about just a set being balanced, I mean, so we drafted triple dragons, right?
Yeah.
How would a balance come across in a situation like that, just triple dragons? Because I was in the same part as you were in,
Yeah.
and something interesting that happened was we were all pretty solidly in our clans. We didn't kind of branch out to get anything else, even though, actually, you know what? It wasn't even really open. Like, if you were in red-green, you were pretty much in red-green. Nobody else was taking your stuff in red-green, and you weren't passing anything good that was in red-green, right?
Right. I mean, that's a good observation. So that has to do with the fact that it was a non-real format. Like us drafting, this past Friday, triple Dragons of Tarkir is an anomaly, right? So they essentially, I don't know if you know the history behind it, but they went into creating the entire Khans of Tarkir world before they came up with any of that. Any other dragons, any Sarkhan, any clans, any of that stuff. The idea was, can we build a 3-set block where the middle small set, so the first one will be big, the third one will be big, the middle will be small. Can we build a drafting environment where the middle set pivots and is drafted first with a first set, and then with the third set, or with the first set and then with the third set? But instead of being the first pack in the draft like they used to do back, like in Onslaught, they did it back in Lore when they did it back. What was the last third big one that they did that with? They
Avacyn.
did that with a new Phyrexia. Yeah, but Avacyn was drafted on its own.
Right.
But anyway, so they're like, well, what can we do to make that middle set actually be drafted last? And as a result, they designed both of the entire environment. So both Khans of Tarkir and Dragons of Tarkir were completely designed and developed knowing that they would be drafted with Fate Reforged, right? I mean, that's the entire point. So, so to your point, you're right. Like, it was super interesting drafting with 3 packs of a set that was meant to actually be drafted with a third different pack. Because what happened is we also had a really good table, so I'll say that off the bat. Like, we also were drafting with people who actually pretty much, for the most part, knew what the heck they were doing. So when you sit down at a table like that with a very large set that is just designed to build these branches off into the small set, when you remove that opportunity, you know, you have essentially put into place 3 packs which have super clear signals, right? Like, you essentially just have 3 packs where you're like, oh, this is my bomb. I'm drafting this clan. It's always going to be open because everyone else is essentially going to draft to their rare, and there's so much to go around. We're not scrambling in a third pack, you know, to make up for a power level difference. Like, there's going to be so much redundancy in the commons and the uncommons that you see that all the decks are going to be pretty darn efficient and, again, very redundant. So having people know what the heck they're doing, drafting with packs that aren't really going to change or throw anyone a curveball in the third pack. Yeah, you're going to come away with a table where every person, all 8 people, have, you know, a consistent, efficient deck, and which is cool. Like, I like that. I thought the same thing happened when we drafted Triple Fate Reforged. I actually like Triple Fate Reforged better than I did.
Okay, no, I'm gonna stop you at Triple Fate Reforged. Now, see, drafting Triple Dragons seems kind of balanced, but drafting Triple Fate seems complete opposite of balanced.
You think so?
I think so, actually, because you had a guaranteed gay land in every pack, and what you could have done is just take those gay lands, pick like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, you're right.
A 5-color,
yeah,
you know, a
that's
5-color
true.
deck with all the bombs in the second and third packs.
Yeah, I thought about doing that. So the one time we actually did draft Triple Fate, I definitely like went into it thinking, you know, wait, there are guaranteed. You know, they're guaranteed gain lands. They're guaranteed dual color tap lands. But then I thought about it, right? Because in cons, you could actually open up a booster pack that 2 of the common slots could be dual lands, and 1 of the uncommon slots could be a tri-land. So in fact, in cons, there was, on average, actually more mana fixing in each pack than the guaranteed mana fixing in Fate Reforged.
I mean, you're right about on average.
Yeah.
But then in Fate, it's just 1 in a pack, and if you're taking
it's guaranteed,
all of
yeah.
Right, and if you're taking all of them, that means nobody else has any of them, and that means they're kind of pressured into being locked into whatever colors they picked early on.
Right.
And so by the time it gets around to the middle of pack 2, it's fairly clear which colors are open and which colors you can just then grab all your stuff in.
Yeah, but that's so weird. I mean, you're totally. It's funny that we're talking about this draft that happened like 5 months ago, but you're totally right. Like, if you would have to devote like your first 8 picks to that though, which sucks. That's like super bad. Like, you're passing like Sandblasts and like Bathe and Dragonfires.
Yeah, I mean, it requires a lot of discipline for sure. But
yeah.
You know what? I ended up getting like 5 Lotus Ijins. So
yeah, that exactly. That's a deck. Yeah, like that's a deck that wins. So I don't know. But again, I agree with you 100%, man. Like, drafting Triple Dragons of Tarkir was super balanced. It was super fun. I drafted this green-red, beat down deck, and it was awesome. I guarantee you that's going to be the color combination I look to be open in the Dragons of Tarkir draft. From the things I've heard from other people who have just sat down and drafted it with Fate Reforged, the set's supposedly pretty fast. Actually, it looks slow, but it looks slow on paper. But from everything I've heard and seen, it plays really fast. So
yeah, and I can see why you would think that it might be slow because Dragons of Tarkir, you naturally think about dragons, which are like 5 or 6 drops. Totally. But a lot of the meat of the set is all in like 2 and 3s. Stuff that you're gonna like anticipates all your warriors and your stuff that you're dashing at 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And I think for you played like red green, and even though a lot of your cards were on the higher end, you also had a lot of like green stuff at lower end, didn't you?
Yeah, I had infinite 2-drops. I mean, this set is filled to the brim with good 2-drops. And I mean, of course, the other side of the coin is if you build a deck with just 2-drops, which is actually possible in like green and any other combination, like green and white and green and red in particular have a bunch. But that's also not good because if you don't kill them and they just start resolving dragons like you're going to die. So you need a decent curve. But I had so many insane 2-drops that just scaled in the late game that the color combination was like unbeatable because I had like the 3/3 on 2 defender guy, which is insane, right? He just blocks anybody in trades. And then you can, once you get formidable, so once you put another 5 power worth of stuff on the board anywhere, he can just start swinging in as a 3/3, which is insane. You got the grizzly bear guy, so just the 2/2 for 2 that if you get to formidable, you can pay 5 mana and make him a 6/6 attacker, which is insanity. Like, it's just stupid good. The Kolagon Ascendant, I think is what it, or Acolyte or something, which is a 2/1 for a colorless and a red. When it becomes blocked, you assign 1 point of damage to whatever it's blocking, right? Which is kind of a feel bad, by the way. Like, there are some people who read that line of text and they don't quite get it immediately, so they just see a 2/1 on your board and they just snap block with an X1. Because they're like, oh, I'm going to kill this guy, but they don't think about, like, before damage happens, that triggers. And so your dude just, like, shoots their X1 and kills it, and they're like, oh, we didn't trade. That feels super bad. So so that's an interesting one to keep an eye out on. If you see someone resolve that against you, don't block inappropriately. But
Hang on,
yeah.
you mentioned something about a formidable guy that was a 2/2. You can make a 6/6. Is that the talk about Beastbreaker, right?
Beastbreaker, yeah, the card's nuts.
How many of those do you have? Because I never saw any of them go around.
Yeah, I had 2, and I also had 2 of the 3/3s. My deck, again, because we drafted triple DTK, the redundancy was very high, was unusual.
I mean, 3/2s that had regenerate from. Oh no, defender formidable.
Yeah,
I see it.
that guy's insane, dude.
And he can attack as though it didn't have defender.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I see it.
Yeah, that card's
Yeah, that
so
is actually
good.
really good. I mean, you were just saying your deck had a chock full of 2/2s, but what you can end up doing is because you have a bunch of 2/2s, you reach formidable at like turn 4.
Totally, and every single time. I mean, there was never a time where I had like a third creature on the board, and all my creatures were cheap. So getting a third creature on the board and sticking it wasn't very difficult. And when you did, formidable just turned on. Like there's a this is again the color combination I really recommend everyone draft because it's insane. If it's at your seat, go for it. Like there's a 4/2 with trample for 4, right, which is already good. And when he has formidable, he gains first strike. So he just deals enough damage to kill something, tramples over the rest. Oh, dude, it just makes combat a nightmare for your opponent. Yeah, the deck was very, very good, and the removal in red is insane too. I mean, we've seen standard decks playing Draconic Roar, right?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Just this weekend in Richmond, I saw Draconic Roar resolve 4 times in 5 turns, and
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
it was actually kind of crazy to watch. And it actually, there is a deck in the top 8 that played 2 of Draconic Roars.
Yeah.
Basically red green.
The card's insane. I mean, in draft, you just get to for 2 damage, instant speed, 3 damage to something isn't bad. Like it's a slightly worse flame slash, right? But if you reveal a dragon, you just 3 to their dome. So it's I don't know if you were around in Zendikar, but Searing Blaze is a card where instead of a colorless and a red, it was red. And it was instant speed, but if you played a land that turn, you not only dealt 3 to their creature, but 3 to them. So it was kind of like that, but this one's actually easier to activate, right? And it's easier to cast in the format. And that card was just absolute bonkers for me, man. Anyways, enough about my deck. What did you draft? I know you had a good deck too. So.
Right. And so, like we said, this is triple dragons, so everyone went kind of deep into what they were doing. I went into blue-black, and it had a very heavy like exploit theme going on.
I think exploit's really good.
Yeah, and I think it was very good too. But it just so happened that there were 3 other people at the table who also went blue-black.
Mm.
And this is not to say that we were fighting over cards, but really they had the better blue-black bombs than I did. One guy had a Dragonlord Silumgar in his first pack, and another guy had 4 like a case of ice that just all came around to him and never saw its way around to me. And so, I mean, I had good stuff. A lot of mine had to do with like Silumgar Butcher, very, very value tempo swingy kind of things, where I exploit a guy and I, generally just 2 for 1 your stuff, give your creatures -1, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you live long enough to start resolving those kind of bigger exploit bombs, like it's it's very difficult for you to lose.
Right.
Again, the
Especially
problem
against
is
like
living.
especially against like a fair deck,
Yeah.
where your stuff is about the same size as my stuff,
Yeah.
but because I can exploit, I can do more things, or at least gain more value out of my cards. And especially when you pair it with, I got two of these cards, a Youthful Scholar. When this creature dies, as
Oh
a
yeah.
2/2, this creature dies, draw two cards. When I start getting that engine going, then it's just, nuts.
Yeah, the deck, I mean, it's just total value town. There's so many ways to draw cards. Youthful Scholar not only can just, like, sometimes just attack for free because you've tempoed them out, and he deals
Right.
2, and then in your second main phase, you just, like, play some crazy exploit thing, sacrifice
Right.
him, draw 2 more cards. Like, yeah.
Right. I exploit him, and then there's this one that does an unsummon, basically. Exploit a creature, return a creature to your hand, and that's basically a 3-for-1. I get rid of one of mine, I bounce one of yours, and I draw 2 cards.
Oh, that's so insane, dude. Yeah, that deck is super good, dude. Did you have the other guy I really like in that deck to kind of set up your exploit stuff or like give you enough time is
Yep.
the 2/5 Death Touch Cobra. Like he literally is just a 2/5 with Death Touch, but it's so good and so well positioned in this format that it's an uncommon.
I actually did not see him come around.
Oh my god, dude. That
My
thing
games
is
were actually
ridiculous.
really close. I played against Nick, who we from our podcast.
Yeah.
Those are very close games. He was playing basically a white and red Warriors deck, and every time it came down to like 2 or 3 life points in total. And on the last one, game 3, I don't know what the correct play was here, but I had in my hand this what's it called, a Carsey something, the one where you exploit and then basically you drain for 2.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I didn't know what the right play was, whether I should be exploiting him when I played him because I needed a blocker. But at the same time, his life total is really low, and I had this one blockable guy. And so, it just really at the margins there. Like, if I exploited my guy, would he have just swung in, or did he have some kind of combat trick, would then pump it, and I would die on the next turn, stuff like that. And I think the deck had legs. It just was very close.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I think cards like that in particular, I think you pretty much always exploit if you know you're either like tempoing them or getting like a 1-for-1. I think you pretty much always do that. But in with that guy in particular where like you drain them too, I think you only ever exploit with that guy if you're just going to kill him.
Right.
Right? Or if you're like exploiting away like the 1/1 flyer that draws you cards, if that is just blanked by a dragon they have or something, then you probably do that. But I don't know, man. That's a really good point. On the same lines, I actually beat the guy who was playing the Silumgar deck that you were talking about, and there was this interesting series of plays where, like, he had in his hand the 1/2 for 3, I think, where like if it dies, you just get a card back from your graveyard, right? So you
Right.
can exploit that guy away, and so he did it, and he played it after I'd gotten rid of just some thing in his hand that didn't matter, and he'd resolved a Dragonlord Silumgar, and on the next turn I was able to kill his Silumgar. But essentially he misplayed because he just played that guy, exploited it to really do nothing but get like a random not as good card from his graveyard when he knew there was a very good chance his Dragonlord Silumgar was going to die. Right? And if he would have just waited a turn and not played an unnecessary blocker, essentially, I would have had to kill his Dragonlord Silumgar twice, and that would have been incredibly difficult for me. So the point of the story is you really need to know what you're trying to do with the exploit mechanic to really take advantage of it. But if you're good enough to really read like 2 or 3 turns ahead, it's going to be very difficult for you to lose with that deck if you have the right pieces.
Absolutely. There's just so much in here that's not. It's very implicit. It's not explicit.
Yeah,
Something
totally.
like formidable, where you know you have 8 power and you know you can do this, and it's always good if you can do formidable. I mean, you wouldn't not activate formidable.
Right.
Whereas with exploit, you kind of have to see 2 or 3 turns ahead to see how stuff is going to affect you down the road. Yeah.
Absolutely, dude. By the way, Uncommon All-Star that looks not that good on paper, but was the best card in my deck, by the way, is the 2/4 like something Elders. Oh, what the heck is that card called? But basically,
Circle of Elders.
Circle of
It's,
Elders.
Yeah, it has vigilance and formidable.
Yeah, the card was insane in my deck. Like, it doesn't even look that good. And then, like, every time I played it, like, you just get a 2/4 for 4 mana, which is like, but it has vigilance, so I got to attack for free basically all the time, like with tricks up, right? And then I would play a trick, like kill something. My guy's also not dead. My guy's also triggering Formidable, so in my second main phase I can tap it for 3 more colorless mana to play more spells and like resolve more dudes as blockers. Yeah. The dude was absolute bonkers. Like I will be drafting this every single time.
Actually,
Card,
it looked amazing. Yeah.
yeah, the card is super silly. And shout out to Elmer too, by the way.
All right. So I think that's kind of more the story of just Dragon's Draft is you want to go deep on one of these mechanics.
Yeah, no question.
Yep.
And stick with it. Stick to. You don't necessarily have to draft to your bomb like you did in Favor Forge, but I don't think it could hurt. All right, dude. So let's talk about these Judge promos that were just announced a couple of days ago. They look pretty ridiculous, man.
And so the way I found out about this was somebody posted it on our Facebook group, and they just said the reprinting Damnation and Ravages of War and Wasteland. And of course, being the player that I am, I get interested right away. I was like, oh, Damnation, that's cool. But these are Judge promos, so you probably won't see one of these. But Ravages of War was an interesting card, and it's a card I haven't seen before because I don't look that far back with old cards. And it's coming from a set that's called Portal 3 Kingdoms.
Portal 3 Kingdoms. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you talked about how this set was like an effort by Wizards to create Magic outside of the U.S. and just put it in China and try to sell it based on like the Three Kingdoms storyline, kind of print functional reprints of cards that already existed, but with that storyline.
Yeah, which is a crazy idea when you think about it. So the so the Romance of the Three Kingdoms kind of myth and lore has always been huge in China. It's kind of their national history book, right? And Wizards, way back in the mid '90s was like, hey, we have all these cool cards. A lot of the names, a lot of the story isn't going to make as much sense if we just have them the way they are now. So let's make, just like you said, pretty much one-for-one functional reprints of some of these really powerful cards, turn it into an entire set, and only release it in decent quantities, like in China and in Malaysia. I think they did some, and they did a bunch in Australia, but not. So they did a lot of Asia Pacific. Printing of this, but none in the U.S. Right? So
so you get these crazy mechanics that I guess you only ever hear of occasionally, like horsemanship and stuff like that. Yeah. And the other crazy part I learned about was because they were only released in these places. You could buy say Ravages of War, for example. You could buy a Japanese near mint copy for $200, but an English copy would set you back like $350 to $400.
Yeah, dude. Just because the supply pool is so low, they only released such limited quantities of it, and only in Australia, where no one's gonna play Magic, so nobody really opened it, and B, to export it from Australia to the U.S. for the people who wanted it costs a ton of money. So I mean, there's all of that value tied up in these super old cards. So.
And it's kind of funny too because. How when you play EDH and you're into collecting all that sort of thing, all these foreign languages tend to be more valuable, especially at foils, but for these cards, it's the other way around.
Right, for the one set that's Asia Pacific centered, for whatever reason, the English versions are just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, there you are. Magic is a crazy game.
It is a crazy game, man. But this is going to be. I mean, it's good for Ravages of War, for Cube in particular. One of the reasons they. Wizards of the Coast really doesn't care about Cube at all, other than what they do on Magic the Gathering Online. But the people who run their judge programs and who are friends with judges have very good understanding of how Magic judges like to play the game and like to experience the game. They know that judges primarily play EDH, and judges the EDH was created by judges, and judges primarily like to play Cube because they've been playing. Judges are people who've been playing for so long and tend to be collectors rather than power gamers. So they have a lot of copies of cards and can make cubes pretty easily. So so the cards that they choose to be Judge promos tend to be the perfect things to slot into powerful cubes. So it's no surprise to me that Ravages of War, which would otherwise be a $500 card, they're essentially just giving to judges for being part of the program, and that's good. That's Wizards doing right by that community.
Yep. And speaking of, let's go into shipping. How about that?
Yeah, so if you if you were to buy a Judge promo, Ravages of War, Justin, let's say somehow you get your hands on it, right? And
Sure.
you wait a while, you maybe put it on eBay, it sits for a while, whatever, but and then maybe you put it in your TCG player store, which I think now you can do Judge promos, or you couldn't do it before. I don't know how that works.
As long as it has a listing on TCG Player, you can put it in.
You can
For
just put it
example,
up.
yeah, I mean they sell Judge promos, and as long as you have a seller account, you can sell Judge promos. There's no problem with that.
Okay, so and for the listeners, let's total transparency. You've been a TCG player vendor for a little while now, right? Like you're very familiar with the system and selling cards and how all that works.
I would say that, yeah, I've been a seller. I have a seller account on there that's reached the top level. So basically, the top level you would reach as a small seller, not really a store.
Sure.
I've had like 100 sales in the past, well, since history. So maybe the past 4 months or so.
Wow, that's really good, actually. Yeah. But so you're comfortable enough with the program for us to kind of
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about selling on it.
Knowing how to ship these cards, how
Yeah.
much to list them for, what your, I guess, what your revenues are after shipping and fees
Yeah.
and all that stuff. I mean, once you've done it for a couple dozen times, it really just comes to you.
Awesome. Okay, so if you were to sell this Ravages of War, right? Let's say you sell it for $500, right? Like what are the processes that you are going to go through to make sure that this card is insured, that you're shipping it for the cheapest price you can, so you're maximizing your profit, and making sure you're doing right by your customer? I mean, I know you've done a lot of research on this. I think you finally, hit on the best method for this. So can you give us a
Yeah.
little seminar, a little one-on-one?
Yeah. So for a card like this, that's like $500 or so. You would definitely want to ship it with tracking. And actually, let me step back and just give you an overview of what what shipping options are available to you.
Yeah.
So when you go to the post office, or actually don't go to the post office, just look online before you go to the post office, because going to the post office is confusing.
Mm. Okay.
Especially,
Okay.
especially with someone who's like me, 20 plus years old, never really sent snail mail.
Yeah, totally.
And so regular mail, as you think about it, this is called first class mail, which doesn't make sense, but just go with it. It's called first class mail.
Right.
And every time you have an envelope and you stick a stamp on it and you send it out, that's called first class mail, right?
Okay.
Now, say you want to get a bit fancy. Say you want to ship a bubble mailer. You have like a CD or a video game or something that you just want to put inside, one of those brown envelopes with like bubbles on the inside. You can't just stick a stamp on it, but you can basically stick a few stamps on it or calculate shipping in such a way that it becomes a first-class parcel. It's a little bit different from first-class mail, because first-class mail was basically a letter. First-class parcel is kind of like a step up from that.
Is that a weight issue, or does that have to do with the type of packaging you choose, or what?
It does have to do with the weight, and one of the best ways that you can figure out stuff like this is if you go on to paypal.com/shipnow. They give you the options. This is how I found out, is when you go onto that site, paypal.com/shipnow, you can calculate the shipping that you need for first-class parcel and also for priority mail, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And you enter the addresses you're shipping to and from, you enter the weight of the item, they'll calculate the shipping for you, and at the end of everything, what happens is you can pay for shipping on PayPal, and they'll give you a printout that you then print and you cut out and you paste on your bubble mailer. Then you can then drop in the mail, and what's on that printout is barcodes and address information, and basically when the mailman or mail person comes to pick it up, they'll just scan all that stuff, and assuming you did all of this right, it'll get into their system. You'll see that order number. There typically is a tracking number or something like that that goes with this, and so you'll be able to then see the package go from wherever you send it out to till it reaches its destination. And this is especially useful because on a higher ticket item, a higher ticket sale, let's say $20 or more, you generally want confirmation that your package reaches its destination, because TCG Player or eBay, these markets typically have a stronger protection for the buyer as opposed to the seller. So if it gets to the point where they say you didn't ship and you say you did, they generally favor the buyer.
Okay. Fascinating. But this is one way to kind of, I don't know, keep your butt out of the fire, though, because so you can at least show on tracking that you did send, right? I mean, you can at least make that argument.
Well, it's not about just showing that you did send. It's not enough to give them a receipt to say that, here, I paid for postage and sent it out. What you also have to be able to say is it reached its destination, and that's where tracking comes in. So let's go back to the first class parcel, right? You went on to PayPal/ShipNow, and you paid for this postage, and what they let you do is on the options, it's kind of like an extra, but in general you do want to check this box. They allow you to select the USPS tracking, and that is what gives you the barcode, or rather tracking number that you can also get on a receipt if you went into the post office.
Okay.
That allows you to track your mail as it goes through the system. And so once it says, yes, it's been delivered, this ID has been delivered, then you're in a much better standing to say, if there is a dispute, that your package reached its destination.
Well, perfect. So, I mean, why would you ever not do this, right? Like, if you're sending something that really you could lose money on, it sounds pretty simple. It sounds like you can just do it from your computer if you have a printer that has paper and ink.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. As to why you wouldn't do it, well, if you're only sending something like $5 to $10 worth of cards,
Mm-hmm.
it's not worth to pay shipping that's like $2.
Got it. Okay. And
That's
is it always going to be, I mean, unless you're sending something that's like a big box of cards, it's always going to be what, like $2 or $3 for tracking? And
Yes, in general, yes. With a bubble mailer and like anywhere from 2 to 10 cards, it's just going to be like within an ounce or two.
Yeah.
And in general, those prices tend to be in like the $2 to $3 range.
Okay.
But okay, so you talked about insurance. So if you're selling something like a card that's $200 or more, then things get a little bit hairy, because what you then want to do is insure the package as well. Because if it's less than $100, insurance kind of doesn't really play a part there, because it's just maybe it's just not worth insuring for how much it is.
Sure.
But when you're sending something like a power is a good example. When you're sending something like that out, which I don't have any experience with, but it follows the same principle. First, you have to get first-class parcel, or even you could even go for priority mail, which is a step above, because that guarantees that it gets delivered and there's better tracking and it gets delivered between like 2 to 3 days. Mm-hmm. There are all kinds of options like that out there, and it also gives you a certain amount of insurance built in. So you really have to talk to someone who knows more about the shipping higher dollar items than I do, but the principle of it is still the same. You would pay for postage, you would print all that stuff out, you would put it on your bubble mailer or your box, and you would send it out.
Got it.
Okay. And this is why you don't want to step into the post office, because if you don't look at all this stuff beforehand, it gets confusing, because when you walk in there and you say, I want the cheapest option to send this bubble mailer with delivery confirmation, it'll tell you two things. First, they'll say the cheapest option is first class parcel or something like to that nature. And the first thing that goes through your head is, well, first class sounds expensive. I don't want to pay first class.
Yeah.
And of course that's where it doesn't make sense, because first class is really,
it's the only. It's
like, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Well, interesting. So I mean, that was a good lesson, man. I mean, that's it sounds, if you love doing it, then more power to you. You know what I mean? And it's awesome that you've taken the time, and done the research to figure out how to do it right. Because I mean, I've heard nightmares stories. I mean, of people losing things like power. I mean, I've heard that happen to people just because they didn't do the right tracking, the right insurance, and it can burn you. So it's definitely worth taking your time and paying the extra few bucks to ensure that your goods get to the customer on time and securely. So
absolutely. I mean, just learn how to, if you're in the business, or if you're going to be selling stuff like this, then you really just want to take the time to learn this once and just remember it for forever.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, that was fantastic. Let's wrap up here. We have a little bit of time allotted left. We don't want to keep you guys online for too long, but you want to switch into standard real quick, just shift gears and talk about what was going on at the SCG Invitational in Richmond over the weekend. You got a chance. Excuse me. You got a chance to watch a little bit of this, right?
I did, and so over the past weekend they had the Invitational in Richmond, Virginia, and I watched a few games. I didn't watch too much. I saw a bit of the top 8, and I watched like a little bit of day 2, and I saw a few games. So the ones that mattered the most were the Mono-Red aggro. I think Michael Braverman was playing that, and I also saw a red-green aggro, the one which I said they resolved like 3 Draconic Roars
Yeah, dude.
with a dragon. Revealing a dragon. So basically 3 Searing Bloods.
Yeah.
Or Searing Blaze, depending on which set you're in.
Right.
And I also saw a Abzan Control versus, I think it was one of the top 8 games. Abzan Control against Blue-Black Control.
Yeah, that was Jacob Wilson versus Reed Duke. So at the tournament.
Oh, Sultai Reanimator. I'm sorry, Abzan Control versus Sultai Reanimator. That's right.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and last one, a bonus one, because I played this standard deck. I saw a Blue-Black Control Mirror.
Ugh.
And at first you're gonna think, oh, that sounds awful. How can you watch a game like that? Except that this game, I mean, the first one was slow. I'll say that, but like game 2 took 8 minutes. They were just playing, bam, bam. It was amazing. It was really fun to watch, and they weren't misplaying either. They were just playing really quickly, and you saw like dig through times and counterspell wars and stuff like that going on. That was really fun to watch. 8 minutes, yeah.
That just sounds unreasonable. Like you'd have to memorize
and the
every
third
single
game
line.
took like 8 or 9 minutes too, so it was actually a really fun game to watch because
That's
it didn't
insane.
drag out. It could have, but they just made it quick.
Huh. That's more power to him, man. To be able to play that kind of deck that quickly, you've really got to allot some brain space to be able to do that right, man. That's just super crazy. But it looked like the event was pretty good. Again, it was an invitational, so there's a set number of seats, and you have to qualify for it. We saw, all the normal big names play. Jacob Wilson took it down with Abzan Control, which is the deck he's on essentially in every format. Reed Duke came in second with an interesting but pretty typical Sultai Reanimator build. We saw all the regulars. Abzan Aggro, the green-white Devotion deck, piloted to the finals, to the top 8 by Chris Anderson, who's actually an Indianapolis native, an Indianapolis Golden Boy. I haven't seen him around on the scene here in a while, but he's been an SCG grinder for a very long time. And Jeskai Tokens, I guess, which kind of broke out in the SCG Open, which was, I think, going on at the same time. But which looked like a very interesting deck, but just kind of a normal take on that deck. And then, of course, the red-green aggro deck that you talked about rounded out the top 8, and looks like the easiest one to build. So it looks interesting.
It does actually look that way. I mean, Mono-Red, I guess, is easy to build, but it's far from easy to play because one thing that I saw on camera, at least, was this wasn't Michael Braverman. This is some other player that was also like in day 2 and probably on like round 12 or so.
Yeah.
And he just had a lot of problems finding threats that were not on the ground because once they resolve a Caryatid, once they resolve a Courser, and they stabilize at like 10 or 12 life, your game is done.
Yeah, it's so hard to break through that stuff. I mean, you have, in the Michael Braverman deck, he had 3 heel cutters, but heel cutters do very little against a couple Sylvan Caryatids when you really need to just hit them. They'll just maybe block, maybe just, they don't care. Right, it's very difficult for you to really get over the top and bring them down to
right,
and so
this other red-green deck, I guess, which you started out with, sounds more reasonable, especially if you're kind of a player that's maybe a little more inexperienced like myself, because I play Blue Control and I'm not very experienced, so I can't do those 8-minute games.
Yeah.
And this was actually kind of interesting to watch because it had the aggressiveness of like a red deck, but you also had stuff like Draconic Roar, which is like almost a 1 card for 6 damage, ideally. But you're playing so many dragons and like Storm Breath dragons and Thunderbreak regions that you can hit this to like 70 to 80% reliability,
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Like if
and then hit you in the air. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're a player who really kind of wants a nice deck to play that has a nice curve, that's pretty simple to understand, but still has a ton of power and a bunch of threats, this is a deck for you. Like no question. Like this is the one you should play. Like mono red, actually, the saying goes back, since all the way back to the late '90s. The joke is if you're going to be any good at mono red, you have to play mono red like a blue player. You have to play mono red like a blue deck if you want to be any good at it. And I have believed that, for my entire history playing career of playing Magic. I mean, if you really want to do well with just a straight red deck, whether it's aggro or burn, you got to be really good at the math. You have to have a very deep understanding of the meta, and what your cards need to do to get around threats, to deal with threats, and then to deal enough damage to them, essentially before you die, or they resolve big threats against you. So yeah, again, it looks like it would be the easiest deck to pilot, but like you said, it just absolutely is not. So
And so just some breakout cards to hit, I guess, would be some of the dragons saw a lot of play. Like Ojutai saw a lot of play.
yeah, that was
the
interesting to
Thunderbird-
me actually.
Yeah, the Thunderbird region, of course, was probably the most popular one out there. The others, I don't think not so much. There was a couple of Dragon Lord Silumgars running around,
Yeah.
but there wasn't anything outside of that. I don't think. Your Stormback Dragon, of course, but
Yeah, but he's leaving soon,
yeah.
anyways. No, it's interesting. You brought up you brought up Dragon Lord Ojutai, and
Ojutai.
that totally blew me away too. I mean, his price went up. He was like $7 or $8 card. I was able to get off one for like $5 that I just had, but now he's like 13, $14. Do you think that's even remotely reasonable?
I mean, no, but I would not expect him to come back down to $6 to $7 immediately. Probably
Sure.
over the course of another 2 to 3 months. The deck that played him and also played Narset, new Narset,
Mhm.
Transcendent, was the Esper Control by Shaheen Surani, and this was an Esper Control deck that he said on camera was strictly better than a Blue Back Control deck.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what he said, and I don't know. I don't know enough to say one way or the other, but it made 12th place on the SCG Invitational, and I think it was on the back of that deck list that we see Dragonlord Ojutai and Narset come up. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they would fall from their pre-sale prices.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the deck right now, and it looks interesting. I mean, it really does just look like a take on the typical blue-black control. I mean, obviously, it's not trying to get to an Ugin. There's none of that. It's really just resolving more Narsets, I guess, to like get back. I don't even know, to get back like Utter Ends and more Crux of Fate and more like like I said, downfalls and anticipates and dig through times. I guess. I don't
And the
know.
card, yeah, and the card that he said was the most contentious was Silumgar Scorn. He's played 4 Silumgar Scorn.
As you cast counter the spell and said, well, that's so interesting. Boy, you have to. I mean, Silumgar Scorn is just a counter spell, right? If you have
If you have one
of
of your
these
4
dragons,
dragons,
yeah, then
it is just a counter spell. Otherwise, it might be quite a bit worse.
yeah, it would be way worse. Which doesn't make sense to me because you have to hit one of these. That's 4 out of 60 cards, and you have decent card draw. It's not like amazing. There aren't any actual just straight up card draw spells except for dig through time, and that doesn't even really count.
Oh well,
Like,
you have to anticipate.
yeah, it draws you 1 card. I guess it draws you 3 deeper and then you draw a card, which is interesting. But
Hmm.
I don't know, man. The list looks fun. It just doesn't look that powerful. It doesn't look. Maybe it's not as easy for me to identify the power level as it is to just look at like blue black, and realize that you're just like wiping the board over and over and over again until you hit like an Ugin. Like that makes sense. But like Dragonlord Ojutai and Silumgar die to Perilous Vaults. They die to the other end of a Crux of Fate. Like I don't know how this could tussle with that deck. So
Sure.
I don't know. More power to him. But anyways, yeah. I mean, I'm still gonna sell every Ojutai open. I don't think there's a ton of value in this set personally. So
All right, I think we've hit our target for a standard talk. Why don't we wrap up with Pro Tour Brussels on the next April weekend.
Yeah, so on the 10th, everyone is qualified for the Dragons of Tarkir Pro Tour. Will be heading to Brussels in Belgium to play just the good old draft for half of the first day, standard for the next half, and the people who make it through those rounds will do the exact same thing and cut into a top eight. Excuse me, on the second day. And it should be interesting. I'm really, really looking forward to it because I'll essentially only have drafted the real format once, and maybe a couple times online if I do well in the pre-releases. I'll draft the real format a couple of times, but I've only drafted it maybe 3 or 4 times by the time I'm watching that Pro Tour.
And so
And
that's why it was really interesting to watch the new standard at SCG this past weekend. And of course, we have one more weekend to watch how the format will develop before it goes to the Pro Tour.
yeah, I do like as much as we dig on Star City Games, as much as I don't really like a lot of their business practices and the fact that they have the ability to set the market from a finance point of view, they do serve an incredibly um, awesome, incredibly worthy purpose as a place to see this crucible or this catalyst for new standard decks, right? And they always do it like immediately after the cards launch. They have these big high-level tournaments with a lot of coverage, and they do a lot of good for the game by showing off, all these people kind of, working out their brain power and figuring out what's new and what's going to stick. And it's always interesting to see which of these decks actually make it to the Pro Tour. Because a lot of the times, pros will play in these, and they'll just make very small changes to decks that already exist and try to eke out those extra percentage points. But what they won't do is they will never give away, the builds, the super secret tech that they take to the Pro Tour. So that's always interesting to watch, too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. Well, this is a good show. I mean, we got the perfect amount of time in. It was awesome having you on as a guest, getting you to tell us more about how to actually make shipping affordable and secure for the people who really want to get into kind of shipping their cards out. A lot of stuff I didn't know, and I'm glad you were able to spend the time and kind of teach us. Any parting words before we go here, man? I really appreciate you having you on. Hopefully you get to hang out with us more often. This is a good show.
Absolutely, I appreciate coming on. Any parting words? I would say if you're going to play a draft this weekend, go deep on a mechanic. We've talked about this before, and I think this is really the way to go is for this limited environment, which I know we play a lot. You really want to stick to your guns. It might be somebody else at the table who's fighting with you over a color, I guess. But I don't know. This seems, and this would go against best practices, but I think it would be correct in this case to just, don't blink.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, if the signals are coming your way and you're set maybe if you even just have a rare that sets you off the bat, it is so much more beneficial to play to the mechanic that's at your seat because it's so well balanced and so well streamlined. You will only do right by having that kind of discipline. So. Okay, well, thanks again, man, everybody. You heard it here. Thanks again, Justin, for hanging out with us. And until next time, you guys can watch us on twitch.tv/BetterMagic. We stream throughout the week and on the weekends. You can find us on YouTube by searching Play Better Magic. That's all one word. You can bookmark playbettermagic.com. And until next time, don't forget to always play better magic. Thank you.